half-sister started doing backflips in the womb to win our father's fortune. I rolled over and went back to sleep. Last time, I was the one flipping. The cord strangled me, and my mother bled out. This time I decided to let her flip herself to death. I barely settled back into the warm, dark amniotic fluid when I heard her voice. In my head, what if Penelope is the legitimate firstborn? Father loves children who strive. I'll steal all his affection before I'm even born. The entire inheritance will be mine. I blew a few bubbles. Knock yourself out, sis. My father, Richard Sinclair, was busy dismissing my mother's tears. Eleanor, I don't care about Ella. When she gives birth, I'll pay her off, keep the baby, and send her away. My legacy belongs to our daughter. Stop making a scene. Then he moved Ella into the suite right next door. Through the wall, I heard every thought in Madeline's head. Why is father still wasting time with that old hag? Watch me dance. 1, 2, 3, ich. Ella's delighted voice carried through. Richard, the baby is dancing. My father rushed over. Chiriax to Mozart, a prodigy. He wired Ella $50,000 on the spot for a prenatal music tutor. Madeline kicked harder. Thank you, Daddy. Boom, clap. Boom, clap. My mother's voice trembled with resentment. Richard, our daughter is dancing too. Come look. She stroked her stomach and whispered desperately. Sweetheart, we can't let that mistress's child outshine us. Please move a little. I stayed completely still. My father rested his palm on my mother's belly. Is Penelope dancing too? Let me see nothing. The expectation in his eyes withered into disappointment. Penelope simply lacks Madeline's spark. The moment he left, my mother sighed through tears. Why are you so stubborn, Penelope? She'll strip us of everything. Then a sharp scream echoed from next door. Ah, it hurts. Stop moving, baby. Call a doctor. Yele was the shing in agony. My mother slowly looked down at her own peaceful stomach and let out a breathless laugh. You really do love your mother, don't you? Fine, don't move. As long as we both make it through healthy, that's all that matters. Through the wall, Madeline's thoughts raged. You don't understand, mother. Penelope tried to steal my spotlight. I have to work harder. I need father to see I'm the chosen one. The more Yele screamed, the faster Madeline thrashed. My father ignored Yele's agony. She inherited my superior genes. Such strength. Natal movement is natural. Stop being dramatic. Keep going, Madeline. Work yourself into a tight little knot. Let's see how you like the umbilical cord around your throat. From that day on, Madeline embraced her life as a prenatal over a veterinary. For months before birth, she started her body management routine. I must control my appetite. From the womb, I'll reject all unnecessary calories. Penelope balloons into a pig. I'll stun everyone with my gorgeous silhouette. She punched Yella's stomach to induce nausea. Within weeks, Yella looked skeletal. Meanwhile, my mother ate rich soups and fresh fruit. Her skin glowed. Madeline laughed. Keep stuffing your faces. I hope Penelope gets so massive she causes a fatal obstruction. At 5 in the morning, while we slept, Lila was jolted awake by violent movements. An hour of stretching, an hour of yoga, 800 backflips. Father will see that Penelope does nothing but eat and sleep, while I overflow with doctor. After the flips, she danced along with the prenatal music tutor. My mother and I woke late, ate a hearty breakfast, did gentle breathing exercises, and lounged on the balcony in the morning sun. Ella watched us from her window with pure envy. The moment she tried to rest, Madeline pulled on her cord. Don't drag me down. Read those English flashcards. We need the inheritance. Yele survived on 4 fluids. Trembling with exhaustion. My father was amazed by Madeline's constant activity. She's absorbing your very vitality, Yele. This child is destined for greatness. Then he looked at me, and his face fell. Penelope is lifeless. She has no reaction to music or languages, and she's 3 pounds heavier than Madeline. If she remains this lazy, I'll have to reconsider my estate planning. My mother defended me fiercely. My daughter is gentle and perfect. If you're biased, just say so. I turned over and went back to sleep. The final prenatal checkup arrived. Even my grandparents were shocked at Isla's state, skeletal. Can she even deliver a healthy baby? Madeline was furious. What do you old fools know? I'm slender, so I can slide right out. Penelope will get stuck when she's struggling. I'll trigger early labor. Climb out first and claim the crown. During the ultrasound, Madeline forced herself to turn and wave at the screen. The umbilical cord was already wrapped around her neck. 3 times my grandparents gasped. Prodigy. She's communicating with us. My father beamed. If she comes earlier than Penelope, I'll make her my firstborn. Madeline was ecstatic. You should have said so earlier, Daddy. Watch me come out right now. Suddenly, Yele gasped and collapsed. My water broke. The baby is coming. Madeline forced her way down the birth canal. Before Yele's cervix could even dilate. Just a little more. Push. Father's billions are mine. Ella lost consciousness from the massive hemorrhage. My father carried her toward the delivery room. My grandparents ran behind. My mother stood in the hallway pale. Penelope, is she really going to be born first and take everything? My heart sank. I checked my position. Head down, body strong. Limbs developed. I decided to move. My mother gasped, touching her stomach. At the exact same time, Madeline's thoughts grew faint. I'm so hungry. I can't push. Why is there so much blood in my mouth? And this cord, why is it so tight? Suddenly, my father walked into our room and tossed a thick document onto my mother's bed. Sign the divorce papers, Eleanor. You'll get a generous settlement. But Penelope won't touch a dime. My mother stared at him, tears in her eyes. But my water broke, too. I'm about to give birth. Looked at her with utter indifference. Madeline is my finest child. I'll make sure she's my legitimate firstborn. He forced the pen into her hand. Heartbroken, my mother prepared to sign. Fine. From now on, she has nothing to do with you. I kicked frantically against her ribs. Mom, don't give up. Madeline is choking and now. She hasn't won yet. My father smiled. Blame Penelope for being useless. He couldn't even beat Madeline to the finish line. Madeline's thoughts echoed weakly. Almost there. Push. I'll be the billionaire heiress. Daddy loves me. Penelope will never stand a chance. My mother's hand began to write her name. Just as the pen touched paper, a panic scream echoed from the delivery room next door. Oh, my God, the baby is in danger. The metallic tip of the fountain pen caught on the heavy cotton parchment, leaving a dark, jagged gouge right before the first stroke of my mother's signature. Next door, the scream wasn't human. It was the wet, choked shriek of a woman whose body was tearing from the inside out, immediately followed by the hollow thud of medical equipment crashing into a wall. Fetal bradycardia. A voice bellowed through the partition, muffled but unmistakably frantic. The heart rate is plummeting. Down to 60. 50. Her cervix isn't even at 2 centimeters. Who authorized labor induction on a 32-week gestation? My father's hand, which had been resting firmly on Eleanor's shoulder to force her downward toward the contract, went slack. Richard? Eleanor whispered, her knuckles stark white against the mahogany bed rail. A single bead of sweat rolled down her collarbone. She looked down at her own stomach, which had suddenly tightened into a hard, rhythmic wave. Richard, my water broke. I need a doctor. Richard didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the adjoining door, his pupils dilated with raw, speculative panic. In his mind, Madeline was already the golden ticket, the prodigy who reacted to Mozart, the fetus that danced on command, the physical manifestation of his own supreme vanity. Stay here, Richard muttered, his voice devoid of warmth. The staff is next door. Ella is delivering my heir. Sign the papers, Eleanor. When I come back, I want this settled. He ripped his hand away, turned on his heel, and sprinted out of the suite. He didn't even close the door. The draft from the hallway brought the pungent tang of antiseptic, oxidized blood, and terror. Inside the quiet sanctuary of our room, I didn't panic. In my first life, I had been the one who panicked. When I heard my father's conditional affection echoing through the uterine wall, I had thrashed like a hooked fish. I turned somersaults to show him my vitality. I twisted, I kicked, and I danced until the umbilical cord looped once, twice, 3 times around my throat, choking off my oxygen before my lungs ever tasted air. My mother had ruptured her placenta trying to bear my violent distress, bleeding into the sterile sheets while Richard stood in the corridor, calculating the loss of his investment. Not this time. I braced my fully formed heels against Eleanor's diaphragm and gave one precise, powerful shove downward, engaging my head firmly into the pelvic brim. Mom. I willed through the bone and blood between us. Breathe. Don't sign. Don't look at the paper. Eleanor let out a sharp gasp. The pen slipped from her fingers, clattering against the parquet floor and rolling beneath the dresser. The pain hit her not as a chaotic assault, but as a clean, productive contraction. She looked at the unsigned divorce decree, then down at the wet stains spreading beneath her on the linen. No, Eleanor murmured. Her voice wasn't trembling anymore. The subservient, desperate plea that had defined her marriage for the past 9 months evaporated from her eyes.
No.
Not for him. She reached out, grabbed the bedside call button, and pressed it 3 times. Meanwhile, through the thin plasterboard separating the VIP delivery suites, Madeline's psychic frequency, which had been buzzing in my ear for 8 straight months with smug, hyperactive malice, curdled into a high-pitched, suffocating squeal. It's dark. Why is there no air? Where is the air? Push, you stupid cow. Push me out. I need to be first. Why won't my legs move? My neck. Something is pulling my neck. The telemetry monitor next door began a relentless, monotone flatline beep. Emergency crash C-section, the chief obstetrician screamed. We're losing maternal blood pressure. The fetus has suffered an umbilical prolapse. The cord is braided like a noose. She's strangled herself in the canal. Save the baby. Richard's voice roared from the threshold, sharp and imperious. Do you hear me? The baby is a genius. Save Madeline first. Mr. Sinclair, step out of the sterile field. Your mistress is in hypovolemic shock. Daddy. Madeline's internal voice thinned out, bubbling like water vanishing down a rusted drain. Daddy, look at me. I'm doing the flips. I'm thin. I didn't eat the calories. Why can't I breathe? I adjusted my shoulders within Eleanor's pelvis, aligning myself perfectly with the natural curve of the birth canal. I was 8 pounds of dense muscle, clear fluid, and steady, slow-beating resolve. When Eleanor's personal obstetrician, Dr. Chin, rushed into our room flanked by 2 midwives, having abandoned the chaotic circus in the next room, she took one look at my mother's monitors and exhaled a long breath of relief. 10 centimeters, Dr. Chin said, her hands moving with calm, practiced efficiency. Fetal heart rate is a rock-solid 140. Eleanor, look at me. Ignore what's happening out there. In 3 pushes, your daughter is going to be in your arms. Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath. Let's do it. The delivery room smelled of salt, warm skin, and the sharp iron of life. With one final, steady contraction, Eleanor bore down. I didn't fight the passage. I didn't twist or claw. I slid into the doctor's warm, latex-gloved hands with the ease of an arrow finding its mark. The cold air of the outside world hit my skin like a slap. My lungs, fully expanded and rich with surfactant, inflated for the first time. I didn't whimper. I opened my throat and let out a roar, a loud, clear, furious trumpet of life that echoed off the tiled walls, out into the private corridor, and directly into the surgical theater where a team of 6 doctors was desperately performing CPR on a blue, flaccid lump of flesh. Time of birth, 5:42 a.m., Dr. Chin announced, a triumphant smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. APGAR score, 9, now a perfect 10. Look at those lungs. She's gorgeous, Eleanor. 8 pounds, 4 ounces. They wiped me down with a warm towel and placed me directly onto Eleanor's bare chest. Her skin was hot, damp with sweat, and smelling faintly of lavender soap. I pressed my small, blunt nose against her collarbone. Her arms came around me instantly, locking into place with an instinct as ancient as stone. She was crying, but her tears were silent, cleansing things that washed away months of humiliation. Penelope, she whispered against my wet scalp. My girl, my clever, quiet girl. Through the cracked door of our room, the sounds of the hallway were grim. A crash cart rattled past, wheels squealing against the linoleum. Footsteps were running, followed by the sound of a defibrillator charging. Clear. Thump. No pulse. Again. Charge to 50 joules. Wait, we have a rhythm. Sinus bradycardia. 30 beats per minute. Intubate immediately. Get her to the NICU. Call pediatric neurology. A few minutes later, the door to our room creaked open. Richard stood in the threshold. His bespoke Italian suit was stained with Ella's arterial blood across the cuffs. His tie was crooked, his thinning hair plastered to his forehead with cold sweat. He looked at Eleanor, propped up in bed, glowing with the flushed exhaustion of a natural, uncomplicated birth. Then his gaze dropped to me. I was wide awake. I turned my head slowly and met his bloodshot eyes. There was no warmth in my infant gaze. No newborn blurriness. I stared at him with the cold, unblinking clarity of an ancient creditor coming to collect a debt. Richard swallowed hard, his throat clicking. Eleanor, is it done? She's here, Eleanor said softly. She didn't offer him a seat. She didn't shift to give him a better view. Richard stepped forward, his hands twitching. The divorce papers. Did you sign them before the delivery? I need to know the legal timestamp. Eleanor let out a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. She reached down to the floor, picked up the unsigned, pristine document that had fallen beside her bed, and held it up. In the morning light coming through the window, the blank signature line was glaring. "I didn't sign, Richard," she said, her voice dropping into a register of icy calm he had clearly never heard from her before. "Which means Penelope is your sole, legally recognized, legitimate firstborn heir. Every asset tied to the Sinclair family trust's primal clause is now irrevocably anchored to her." Richard's face drained of what little color it had left. You don't understand. Ella, Madeline. How is the dancing prodigy?" Eleanor asked, her voice dripping with venomous politeness. "Did her prenatal gymnastics earn her the inheritance?" Before Richard could answer, an elderly man with a silver-topped cane stepped into the doorway behind him. It was Arthur Sinclair. "My grandfather was 82 years old, built like a retired battleship, and possessed the sharpest financial mind in the eastern seaboard. He had built the Sinclair empire from a modest shipping line into an energy and logistics conglomerate. He had survived 2 recessions, 3 hostile takeovers, and the profound disappointment of raising a vain, weak-willed son like Richard." Arthur took one look at Richard's blood-spattered cuffs, another look at the unsigned divorce papers in Eleanor's hand, and finally, his gaze settled on me. I didn't cry. I simply let out a small, contented sigh and tucked my fist under my chin. "Arthur," Eleanor said, acknowledging him with a slight nod. "Eleanor," the old man rumbled, his voice like grinding millstones. He stepped past his son, as if Richard were nothing more than a coat rack. He leaned over the bed, his ancient, roomy eyes scanning every inch of my sturdy, pink frame. 8 pounds. 8 pounds 4 ounces, Eleanor replied. "Born naturally. No complications." Arthur reached out one weathered, age-spotted finger. I reached up and clamped my tiny hand around it. My grip was remarkably firm, the product of 9 months of peaceful sleep, unhindered cell division, and rich maternal nutrition. Arthur's eyes flared with something that hadn't been seen in his household for 30 years. Genuine respect. "Good stock," Arthur declared. "Solid. Clear-eyed. A child who knows when to be still." He turned slowly to face Richard, his expression hardening into pure granite. "I just came from the 3rd-floor surgical ward. The doctors had to perform a total hysterectomy on your mistress to stop the bleeding. She will never carry another child." Richard flinched. "Father, the child, Madeline. She's a fighter. She." "The child," Arthur interrupted, each syllable falling like a lead weight, "suffered massive perinatal asphyxia. She was deprived of oxygen for over 14 minutes because her neck was wrapped 3 times in her own cord. The pediatric neurologist informed me that there is extensive bilateral damage to her motor cortex and temporal lobes. She will spend the rest of her life in a specialized care facility, unable to speak, walk, or feed herself." Richard leaned against the wall, his knees visibly buckling. No, she was dancing. She knew Mozart. "She was thrashing in distress, you idiot," Arthur hissed. "She starved herself and her mother for a parlor trick, and you, in your infinite vanity, encouraged it. You gambled the Sinclair succession on a freak show, and you lost." Arthur turned back to Eleanor. "The trust documents are being updated this afternoon," the old man said flatly. "Penelope receives the full generational entitlement. Eleanor, you retain 40% of Richard's operational voting shares as maternal guardian until the girl reaches 18. Richard is stripped of executive authority over the family office." "Father," Richard cried out, his voice cracking with humiliation. "You can't do this. I'm your son, and she," Arthur said, pointing his cane at me, "is my heir. Now, get out of this room. You smell of failure and slaughter." 6 months later, the Sinclair estate in upstate New York was quiet, save for the hum of the central heating and the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the library. I spent my days in a sunlit nursery, overlooking the rose gardens. I didn't rush to hit milestones early. I didn't roll over at 2 weeks or try to recite the alphabet at 4 months. I drank rich, creamy milk, I slept 12 hours a night, and I allowed my infant neural pathways to knit together with unshakable density. True power in this world does not come from performing tricks for the amusement of fools. It comes from endurance. It comes from being the last one standing when the storm clears. Once a week, my father brought Ella and Madeline to the secondary cottage at the edge of the property. Arthur had refused to allow them inside the main manor, but out of a shred of legal obligation, he provided an allowance for Madeline's 24-hour nursing care. One afternoon, Eleanor walked me down the gravel path in my stroller. We passed the cottage garden, where Ella sat in a wicker chair. Ella looked 50 years old, though she was barely 26. Her skin was the color of curdled milk, her hair brittle and thinning. She stared into the middle distance, rocking back and forth with an empty, hollow rhythm. Beside her sat an adaptive pediatric wheelchair. Inside it was Madeline. Her head was too large for her emaciated, rigid body, held in place by a padded cervical collar. A thin, clear tube ran into her nostril, taped to her pale cheek. Her left arm was contracted permanently against her chest, her fingers curled inward like dried claws. Her eyes, cloudy, misaligned, and unfocused, darted frantically toward the sky. As Eleanor stopped the stroller to speak with the head groundskeeper, our eyes met. For a brief, terrifying second, the psychic link that had connected us in the womb flared back to life, not through telepathy, but through the raw, agonizing resonance of two souls who had crossed the river of death together. Penelope. The thought didn't come as words. It came as a ragged, burning scream trapped behind a wall of dead gray matter. I was supposed to be the first. I danced. I did 800 flips. I studied the music. Why won't my tongue work? Why can't I stand up? Daddy, look at me. I know English. I know the flashcards. Look at my silhouette. A thick line of drool spilled from the corner of Madeline's mouth, running down her chin onto her bib. She tried to move her right leg to kick, to show the vitality that Richard had once praised, but the effort only triggered a violent, spastic tremor that shook her entire frame. Ella didn't even look down. She simply reached out with a mechanical, dead-eyed motion and wiped Madeline's chin with a damp cloth. "Stop shaking, Madeline," Ella said, her voice dry as dead leaves. "You're making a scene. Your father isn't coming today. He's in the city trying to sell his watch collection." I watched my half-sister from the comfort of my stroller. I felt no pity. In our previous life, when Madeline had seen me choking on the cord, she hadn't paused. She had laughed and pushed harder, using my dying mother's body as a stepping stone to climb into the world. She had believed that ambition alone, divorced from wisdom, patience, and biology, entitled her to rule. She had treated life like a sprint to a gold mine, unaware that the tunnel she was digging was her own grave. I closed my eyes, turned my head toward the warmth of the afternoon sun, and let out a soft, milky breath. "Sleep, Madeline." I thought toward the silent void between us. "You worked so hard. Now you have all the time in the world to rest." Years passed with the slow, inevitable momentum of a glacier. When I was 5, Richard made his final, disastrous attempt to overthrow my mother and grandfather. Desperate to reclaim his standing and fund an experimental neural stem cell clinic in Switzerland that promised to reboot Madeline's brain, he embezzled $40 million from the Sinclair Shipping Logistics subsidiary. He thought he was clever. He routed the funds through shell corporations in the Caymans, falsifying bills of lading and doctoring audit reports. What he didn't know was that Eleanor was no longer the frightened, weeping wife he had bullied in the maternity ward. Under Arthur's tutelage, Eleanor had completed her master's in corporate finance. She didn't spend her afternoons at charity galas. She spent them in the boardroom, learning the architecture of the family empire. And beside her, quiet and observant, sat me. I never spoke out of turn. I sat at the end of the mahogany conference table with my sketch pad, drawing quiet, precise charcoal landscapes while the executives argued over supply chain bottlenecks and interest rate hedging. They thought I was just a well-behaved child. They didn't notice that my eyes tracked every ledger, that my small ears caught every discrepancy in the quarterly balance sheets, or that I occasionally whispered a single, innocuous question to my mother during the recess. "Mom, why is the fuel expenditure for the Rotterdam route 30% higher than the Baltic Index?" Eleanor would smile, kiss my forehead, and then walk back into the boardroom to tear Richard's fraudulent shell companies to shreds. The day the federal investigators arrived at the Sinclair corporate headquarters, Richard didn't even have the dignity to face them. He locked himself in his penthouse office, downing scotch until his hands stopped shaking. When Arthur and Eleanor entered the room with the corporate attorneys, Richard threw a crystal tumbler against the wall. "You turned my own daughter against me," he screamed, pointing a trembling, red-veined finger at Eleanor. "You poisoned Arthur's mind. If Madeline were healthy, if she had been given the chance, she would have run this company with fire, with brilliance. Not like this cold, mute little monster you raised." I stood beside Eleanor, wearing my school uniform, a navy pleated skirt, and a clean white blouse. I looked at him, my expression utterly smooth. "Father," I said. It was the first time I had addressed him directly in 3 years. Richard froze, the wild look in his eyes faltering. "A fire that burns without fuel only consumes itself," I said quietly, my voice level and clear. You mistook frenzy for ambition and noise for talent. Madeline didn't fail because she was weak. She failed because you taught her that the world rewards cruelty and haste. I stepped forward and laid a manila folder on his desk. These are the divestment agreements. I continued. Grandfather has agreed not to press criminal charges on the condition of your total, unconditional forfeiture of all Sinclair shares, titles, and claims. You will receive a monthly stipend of $4,000, sufficient for a modest apartment in the suburbs and Ella's basic living expenses. Madeline will be transferred to the St. Jude Palliative Care Center, where her medical costs will be paid directly by the Family Foundation. Richard stared at the folder, then at me. His mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. You're 9 years old, he whispered, horror dawning behind his bloodshot eyes. What are you? I am the child who survived, I said. By the time I celebrated my 18th birthday, Arthur Sinclair had long since passed away, leaving his legacy resting entirely on my mother's shoulders and mine. The grand ballroom of the Sinclair Plaza was filled with 300 of the most influential figures in international commerce. Ambassadors, venture capitalists, and tech luminaries raised their glasses under the crystal chandeliers, celebrating the official transfer of the Sinclair Family Trust's controlling interest to its designated heir, Penelope Sinclair. I wore a tailored emerald gown, simple and unadorned, standing beside Eleanor on the dais. My mother looked radiant at 48, her hair swept up in an elegant chignon, her face lined not with bitterness, but with the quiet dignity of a woman who had fought for her place and won. During a lull in the reception, my personal assistant leaned in and whispered in my ear, Miss Sinclair, there's a woman outside the service entrance. She insists on seeing you. The security team was going to remove her, but she has a wheelchair. I set my champagne glass down on the silver tray of a passing waiter. I'll handle it. I walked down the quiet, carpeted corridors toward the rear courtyard, away from the music and the clinking glasses. The night air was cool and crisp. Standing beside the industrial loading dock was Ella. She was completely gray now, wrapped in a threadbare woolen shawl that looked as though it had come from a thrift bin. Beside her sat Madeline in an electric wheelchair, her body so shrunken that she looked like a bundle of dried twigs covered in a blanket. When Ella saw me, she took a hesitant step forward, her hands wringing the fabric of her shawl. Penelope, Ella rasped. Please. We didn't come to cause trouble. Richard passed away last month. Cirrhosis. The monthly stipend stopped with his death. The care home says they're going to evict Madeline next week if the account isn't settled. I looked down at the woman who had once gloated through the bedroom wall, who had taken Richard's $50,000 bribes to play Mozart to a dying fetus. There was no hatred left in me for Ella. She was merely a ghost, haunting the ruins of a life built on quicksand. The account has already been transferred to the Sinclair Foundation's charitable trust, I said smoothly. Madeline will not be evicted. Her care will continue, uninterrupted, for the rest of her natural life. Ella's knees buckled. She dropped to the damp concrete, weeping with a sound like dry paper scraping together. Thank you, God. Thank you, Penelope. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't tell her to get up. I turned my attention to the wheelchair. Madeline's face was turned toward the cold night sky. Her breath came in short, raspy whistles through a tracheostomy tube. But as my shadow fell over her, her clouded eyes shifted. The spark was almost entirely gone, buried beneath nearly 2 decades of neurological silence. But deep within the locked room of her ruined mind, I felt the faint, dying ember of her consciousness. Penelope, the thought was barely a sigh. You won. I stepped closer, leaning down so that only she could hear my voice above the distant murmur of the orchestra inside the ballroom. There was never a race, Madeline, I whispered gently. A tree does not grow by pulling at its own leaves. It grows by burying its roots deep in the dark, waiting for the rain, and letting the seasons do their work. I reached out and lightly touched the back of her twisted, cold hand. You were so busy trying to steal the crown before you were born that you forgot how to breathe. Rest now. The performance is over. A single tear formed in the corner of Madeline's misaligned eye, tracing a slow, clean path down her hollow cheek before catching on the collar of her jacket. She let out a long, shuddering breath, her spastic fingers relaxing for the first time in 18 years. I straightened my posture, smoothed the emerald silk of my gown, and turned my back on the cold courtyard. I walked back through the heavy double doors into the warmth, the light, and the roar of the music, stepping cleanly, effortlessly, into the world that was always mine.